There comes a moment in every human life when the noise of the world becomes unbearable. You feel pulled in every direction, told who to be, what to believe, how to live. The pressure to conform is relentless, and yet, beneath it all, there's a whisper, a quiet voice that says, "This isn't who I truly am." That voice is you, or at least the part of you that has not yet been buried by expectation and fear. And if you are to win at life, not by the standards of the crowd, but by your own truth, you must focus on that voice with everything you have. Too often, people look outward for answers. They try to become copies of others, assuming success lies in imitation. But the unconscious, the great reservoir of your potential, does not respond to imitation. It responds to truth. You cannot become whole by living someone else's life. You cannot win by playing someone else's game. The path to becoming truly victorious begins when you dare to turn inward. Within you lies not only chaos, but the potential for deep order. You contain multitudes, your fears, your desires, your wounds, your strengths. The mistake people make is to reject parts of themselves, to deny the shadow that lives within. But I tell you, what you resist will persist, and what you deny will rule you from the dark. To focus on you means to face yourself in full, to embrace not only the light, but also the darkness, the unlived life, the forgotten self. That is where power lies. You must undergo individuation, not comfort, not approval, but the often painful process of becoming your full self. It is not a journey of vanity, but of necessity. You do not become who you are by accident. You forge it in fire. You wrestle with your dreams. You question your beliefs. You listen to what your soul is telling you, even when it terrifies you. Especially when it terrifies you, for what is a win if you lose yourself in the process? Most people flee from themselves. They numb, they distract, they pretend. But focusing on you is an act of courage. To hold your gaze in the mirror and not look away. To see your flaws and say, "I will work with you, not against you." To look at your past and say, "You do not define me, but I will not forget you." And to look at your future and say, "I will shape you, one step at a time, until I become who I was always meant to be." The world needs people who have come home to themselves, people who have stood in the fire of their own transformation and refused to run. You must win, not by domination, but by integration, not by crushing others, but by becoming whole within yourself. In the world we inhabit, success is often portrayed as something external, something that can be seen and measured by others. It is the title you earn, the wealth you accumulate, the recognition you receive, the applause that follows your name. From a young age, we are conditioned to chase these markers. We are taught to look outward, to compare, to compete, to measure our worth against the ever-shifting standards of society. And so, we begin a long pursuit, often unaware that the object of our desire is not truly our own. We chase an image, a version of success that has little to do with who we are within. In doing so, we risk losing the most vital connection we possess, the connection to the self. The self is not the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. The self is not the job, the social role, or the identity others give us. These are fragments, projections, convenient simplifications we use to function in the outer world. But they are not the whole of us. True success cannot be found in the approval of others, because others see only the surface. They do not feel your inner world. They do not sit with your dreams, your doubts, your longings. They do not know the quiet ache that tells you something is missing, even when everything appears perfect on the outside. That ache is the call of the self, the whisper of the unconscious, asking you to turn inward and listen. We often fear that inward turn. It requires us to step into the unknown, to leave behind the certainty of external validation. When you look within, you confront the truth, not the polished version of yourself, but the raw, unfiltered reality. You see your fears, your contradictions, your shadows. You see how much of your life has been lived to please others, to avoid conflict, to feel safe. But in that confrontation lies power. When you look honestly at yourself, you reclaim your agency. You are no longer just an actor on someone else's stage. You become the author of your own story. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious mind holds more than repressed thoughts or childhood trauma. It also holds untapped potential. It is not simply a storehouse of pain, but a wellspring of creativity, instinct, and transformation. The process of turning inward is not about self-indulgence, it is about self-discovery. In the quiet of your own mind, beyond the noise of opinion and pressure, you begin to uncover what truly matters to you. What do you love? What are you drawn to? Not because it is fashionable or profitable, but because it stirs something deep inside you. That is where your authentic path begins. But this inner path is not linear. It is often confusing and uncomfortable. The psyche does not reveal its secrets easily. It speaks in dreams, in symbols, in strange emotions that do not fit neatly into language. Most people ignore these signs or dismiss them as irrational. But Jung taught us to listen carefully, to treat the inner world with the same seriousness we grant the outer world. Your anxiety may be trying to tell you something. Your restlessness may be a sign that your life is misaligned. The patterns in your relationships, your recurring thoughts, your inexplicable desires, all of these are clues, fragments of the larger picture of who you are and who you are becoming. To achieve true success, you must become a student of yourself. This is not the same as selfishness or narcissism, though many will mistake it as such. It is a sacred responsibility. How can you give to the world if you do not know what you carry within? How can you lead others if you cannot lead yourself? How can you experience joy if you do not even know what brings you alive? We live in a time of deep distraction, where people scroll endlessly through the lives of others, absorbing their thoughts, opinions, and priorities. But no amount of scrolling will bring you closer to yourself. That requires silence, that requires solitude, that requires courage. There is a profound difference between success that is built on outer image and success that is rooted in inner truth. The former is fragile. It depends on circumstances, on the approval of others, on maintaining the mask. The latter is resilient. When you are rooted in who you truly are, you cannot be easily shaken. You may lose the job, the status, the applause, but you do not lose yourself. And from that place of self-possession, you can begin again. You can adapt, grow, and rise without compromising your integrity. Jung often spoke of individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole. This is not the same as becoming perfect or free of flaws. It is the journey of integrating the many parts of oneself into a coherent whole. It is the process of becoming who you were always meant to be, not according to others' expectations, but according to your inner design. Individuation requires inner work, reflection, and a willingness to confront discomfort, but it also brings freedom. When you know yourself, you are not easily manipulated. You are not swayed by trends or intimidated by authority. You walk your path with quiet confidence, knowing that you are not here to perform, but to live deeply and truly. Many people reach their so-called peak of success and feel empty. They have climbed the ladder only to find it leaning against the wrong wall. Why? Because they never asked themselves what success truly means to them. They never turned inward to discover their unique values, desires, and purpose. They allowed the world to define success for them, and in doing so, they abandoned their inner compass. But it is never too late to turn back. The self is always there, waiting. It may have been buried under years of conditioning, but it has not disappeared. Like a seed beneath the soil, it waits for the right moment to emerge. To focus on yourself is not to isolate or reject the world. It is to begin with the one thing you can actually change, your inner life. And from that solid foundation, you can engage with the world more wisely, more authentically, more powerfully. When you align your outer actions with your inner truth, you experience a kind of peace that no accolade can provide. You become whole, and in becoming whole, you become strong. The journey of turning inward is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It is the only path that leads not just to success, but to meaning. And meaning, as Jung so often reminded us, is what the soul truly longs for. There is a quiet war within most people, a conflict not between nations or ideologies, but between the self we present to the world and the self we bury deep inside. We are taught from a young age what is acceptable, what earns praise, and what invites rejection. And so, piece by piece, we divide ourselves. The parts that are likable we polish. The parts that feel dangerous, shameful, or misunderstood, we hide. But this division does not lead to peace, it leads to fragmentation. And no person can feel whole while at war with their own nature. If you wish to grow, evolve, and ultimately win in life, not in the eyes of others, but in your own, you must begin by embracing all parts of yourself, even those you were taught to avoid. Carl Jung called this hidden aspect of the psyche the shadow. It is not inherently evil or malicious. Rather, it is simply the part of you that has been repressed, denied, or exiled. It contains your anger, jealousy, fear, and guilt, but also your power, your intuition, your instincts, your desires. The shadow is everything you were told not to be, but still are, and the longer you run from it, the more it controls you from the dark. The paradox is this: what you do not face within will manifest outside of you. It may show up in your relationships, in your habits, in your inability to feel fully alive. You may think you are in control, but the repressed parts of the self are not silent. They find ways to speak. People often try to heal by focusing only on the light. They chase positivity, affirmation, and peace. But healing does not happen by pretending the dark is not there. It happens by walking into it with courage and compassion. When you embrace your shadow, you are not feeding it. You are integrating it. You are acknowledging that you are more than what is socially acceptable. You are not just kind, you are also angry. You are not just generous, you are also selfish. You are not just composed, you are also vulnerable, and in accepting this truth, you begin to understand what real wholeness looks like. Not perfection, not moral superiority, but honesty, depth, humanity. The danger of denying the shadow is that it grows in power the more you repress it. What you hide from becomes what drives you. The person who denies their anger may become passive, aggressive, or explode unexpectedly. The one who denies their vulnerability may become rigid, cold, or addicted to control. The person who denies their ambition may sabotage their own success. These dynamics are not faults of personality. They are symptoms of repression. The more disconnected you are from your shadow, the more you act unconsciously. You begin to project your disowned qualities onto others, seeing in them the traits you are unwilling to acknowledge in yourself. You criticize, judge, and blame, not realizing that the real struggle is within. To embrace all parts of yourself does not mean to act out every impulse. It means to understand where those impulses come from and why they exist. It means learning the language of your unconscious and using it as a tool for growth rather than a source of shame. For instance, your jealousy might be a sign of unfulfilled desire. Your anger might point to a boundary that has been violated. Your sadness may be the soul's way of saying, "This is not the life I truly want." These emotions are not obstacles, they are messengers. When you listen to them without judgment, you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that have been exiled for too long. Many people fear that if they confront the darker sides of themselves, they will lose control or become something they despise. But the opposite is true. The more conscious you are of your shadow, the less it controls you. It becomes a part of you, not a tyrant, but a teacher. You do not need to destroy it. You need to understand it. Only then can you move from reaction to response, from chaos to integration. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the real work. It is not glamorous. It is not always celebrated, but it is transformative. There is a freedom that comes from self-acceptance that no external success can offer. When you no longer have to pretend, when you no longer feel the need to hide, you begin to live with an authenticity that is magnetic. People can feel it. You no longer need validation to feel worthy. You no longer chase perfection to feel secure. You become grounded, aware, and capable of navigating life with clarity. And ironically, the more you embrace your imperfections, the more whole and strong you become. You are no longer brittle. You are flexible, resilient, alive. This kind of inner work cannot be outsourced. No one else can do it for you. You can read books, attend workshops, hear advice. But in the end, it is your own willingness to face yourself that determines your growth. The process is not linear. There will be moments of deep clarity and others of confusion. You may uncover parts of yourself that you do not yet know how to love, but love them anyway. Begin with acceptance, even if it is small. Say to yourself, "Yes, this too is part of me." You do not have to act on every feeling, but you must acknowledge that it exists. There is no light without darkness, no strength without vulnerability, no courage without fear. The more you integrate your inner world, the more grounded and powerful you become. Not in a performative way, but in a rooted, soulful way. You are no longer chasing fragments of identity. You are becoming whole. And in that wholeness, there is peace. Not the peace that comes from avoidance, but the peace that comes from full presence. You are not split in two. You are not pretending. You are living as one unified being, aware of your complexity and at peace with your contradictions. We are not meant to live as half-selves. We are not meant to perform identities to survive. We are meant to evolve, to expand, to deepen into the full expression of our humanity. That includes the anger, the desire, the ambition, the fear, the joy, and the sorrow. It includes the inner child, the wild instinct, the wise elder, and the dreaming soul. They all live within you. They all want to be heard. You do not need to choose one and discard the rest. Your work is not to simplify yourself. It is to integrate. It is to bring all these voices to the table and learn how to listen, how to lead, and how to live with all of them in harmony. The path to embracing all parts of yourself is not a straight road. It twists, it doubles back, it surprises you. But every time you choose to face rather than flee, to integrate rather than reject, you reclaim a piece of yourself. And in doing so, you become less reactive and more intentional. You begin to act not from wounds, but from wisdom. And not from fear, but from wholeness. This is the work of a lifetime, and it is also the beginning of freedom. For when you embrace all of who you are, you no longer need to run. You are home, not in the world. In yourself. Every human being is born with the seed of their own uniqueness, a distinct potential that is not repeated in any other. And yet, most of us are raised not to discover this uniqueness, but to conform, to imitate, to obey, to become what society finds useful or acceptable. We are shaped by family, by culture, by education, and by the often invisible pressures of the collective. These influences teach us to adapt and survive, but they rarely teach us to become ourselves. In fact, the task of becoming oneself, of fully realizing who you truly are beneath the roles, masks, and expectations, is often regarded as rebellious, even dangerous. But Jung knew that this task is not just important. It is essential. It is the very foundation of psychological health, inner peace, and real freedom. He called this journey individuation. Individuation is the process through which a person becomes an individual, a distinct, whole, and integrated being. It is not about separating from others out of pride or isolation, but about discovering and honoring the inner truth that makes you who you are. It is about moving beyond unconscious identification with roles and social identities, and instead aligning with the deep structure of your psyche, yourself, the totality of your conscious and unconscious mind. This is not a process that happens by accident or overnight. It is not triggered by success or status. It requires inner work, reflection, struggle, and often solitude. But it is the only path to authenticity, and the only way to live a life that is truly yours. Most people live under the sway of the persona, the mask they wear in public to navigate the social world. The persona is not inherently false or bad. It helps you relate, communicate, and function, but it is not the whole story. Behind the persona is the shadow, those parts of the self that have been rejected, repressed, or judged. And beneath the shadow lies the self, the true center of your personality, the part of you that holds your potential, purpose, and deep inner knowing. Individuation is the process of bringing all these parts into conscious relationship. It is the journey from fragmentation to wholeness. And like any meaningful journey, it involves tension, conflict, and transformation. You do not individuate by staying comfortable. You do not individuate by following the crowd or seeking approval. You individuate by becoming aware, by looking within and asking difficult questions. Who am I, beneath what I was told to be? What do I believe, not because I was taught to, but because I have examined it in the light of my own experience? What values, dreams, and instincts arise from within me, and how do they differ from what I see around me? These are not easy questions. They disturb the surface. They pull you away from imitation and toward inner truth. But without them, you cannot grow. You can only repeat. The process of individuation often begins with a crisis, a moment when the outer life no longer reflects the inner life. It may be triggered by loss, illness, depression, or a sense of emptiness despite outward success. This crisis is not a failure. It is a signal from the psyche that something is missing, something vital. It is the soul's cry for authenticity. When you heed that cry, you begin the real work, not of fixing your life to match society's standards, but of transforming your life to reflect your own nature. This requires you to break from convention. It requires you to disappoint others, to outgrow expectations, to let go of identities that no longer serve you. It is not rebellion for the sake of ego. It is transformation for the sake of truth. The deeper you go into this work, the more you begin to encounter the archetypes, the universal patterns that live within the unconscious mind. These archetypes are not ideas. They are living energies, symbols that shape your thoughts, dreams, relationships, and choices. As you individuate, you come into conscious relationship with these forces. You recognize the inner child, the warrior, the wise one, the lover, the destroyer, all parts of your inner landscape. Individuation is not about choosing one and rejecting the others. It is about understanding each part, giving it its rightful place, and learning how to live in harmony with the whole. There is no set path for individuation. It is different for every person because every psyche is unique. But the qualities required are often the same: honesty, courage, patience, and a willingness to sit in uncertainty. You will not have all the answers. You will often feel lost, but that is part of the process. In fact, feeling lost is often the beginning of being found. When you stop living by the map others gave you, you begin to draw your own. It may be slower, it may be more painful, but it will be yours. Individuation is not about becoming better than others. It is not a path of superiority, but of depth. The goal is not perfection, but wholeness. To be whole means to embrace your contradictions, to live with your imperfections, and to grow in awareness. It means you can hold joy and sorrow, strength and vulnerability, certainty and doubt, without needing to deny or suppress. It means you stop dividing your life into good and bad, and begin to see it all as part of your unfolding. This wholeness gives you depth, humility, and compassion, not just for yourself, but for others. When you know your own shadow, you no longer judge others for theirs. When you accept your own limits, you become more forgiving. Individuation creates not isolation, but deeper connection. But this connection is different from conformity. It is not based on pleasing others or fitting in. It is based on truth. When you individuate, your relationships change. You may outgrow some, you may strengthen others, but all become more honest. You are no longer acting from unconscious roles. You are showing up as yourself, and this changes everything. It deepens intimacy. It exposes falsehood. It creates clarity. The people who resonate with your truth remain. The ones who only knew your mask may drift away. This is part of the cost of growth, but also part of the reward. The process of individuation does not mean rejecting society. It means engaging with society from a place of awareness rather than blind imitation. It means offering your true gifts rather than just meeting expectations. Society needs individuals who have become themselves, who think critically, act consciously, and live with integrity. Without individuation, people become cogs in a machine. With individuation, they become co-creators of a more conscious world. Jung believed that the fate of humanity depends on the transformation of individuals, not through mass movements, but through inner work, one person at a time. To walk the path of individuation is to walk the path of meaning. It is not always the most comfortable path. It often leads you through doubt, darkness, and solitude, but it leads you somewhere real. It leads you to your center, and from that center, you live not as a copy, but as an original. Not as an actor on someone else's stage, but as the author of your own life. This is what it means to become whole. This is what it means to become free. There is a common misunderstanding in the modern world, one that discourages many from turning inward and doing the difficult work of knowing themselves. That misunderstanding is this, that to focus on yourself is to be selfish. That self-reflection is self-absorption, that turning away from the noise of the world to listen to your own inner voice is somehow an act of vanity, of arrogance, or of escapism. But nothing could be further from the truth. Focusing on your inner life is not selfish. It is an act of profound courage. It is the starting point of all meaningful transformation, and it is perhaps the only way to live a life that is not merely performed, but truly lived. Carl Jung knew this well. He saw that most people live disconnected from their inner reality, caught in patterns of unconscious behavior, chasing goals and expectations that were never really their own. He understood that this disconnection from the self is what gives rise to much of the suffering in modern life. Anxiety, resentment, boredom, depression, chronic dissatisfaction. These are often symptoms of an unlived life, a life that has been outsourced to social norms, roles, and distractions. In Jung's words, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And that is not because people are weak. It is because the soul is vast, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening. Turning inward means stepping into mystery. It means confronting your own darkness. It means letting go of illusions. And that takes far more courage than most outward accomplishments ever require. When you choose to focus on yourself, not in the superficial sense of pampering your ego, but in the deeper sense of becoming self-aware, you are declaring your willingness to live honestly. You are saying that you are no longer satisfied with appearances, no longer content with approval, no longer willing to follow paths that do not resonate with your truth. This is not selfishness. This is responsibility. Because until you know yourself, you cannot fully love, create, give, or lead. Everything you do is filtered through layers of confusion, projection, and unconscious wounding. But when you begin to understand yourself, your motives, your fears, your patterns, you begin to live with clarity. And with that clarity comes authenticity. And with authenticity comes integrity. Focusing on yourself often means withdrawing for a time. It means saying no to things that drain your energy. It means stepping away from noise, from constant stimulation, from the endless stream of comparison and distraction. You may stop attending every event. You may stop saying yes out of obligation. You may even stop trying to rescue others when your own spirit is exhausted. And people might not understand. They may call you selfish, distant, self-involved. But that is only because they do not see what you are doing. They cannot yet understand that you are digging down into yourself, pulling out what is false, uncovering what is real. You are not abandoning life. You are preparing to live it more fully. Inner focus also means facing the parts of yourself that you've avoided. It means no longer blaming the outside world for everything that goes wrong. It means looking at your own role, your own wounds, your own choices. That's not selfish. That's bravery, because it's much easier to point fingers than to ask, what am I not seeing in myself? And yet that is where growth begins. And not in changing others, but in becoming responsible for your own reactions, your own perceptions, your own energy. The more honest you become with yourself, the less likely you are to manipulate, judge, or resent others. You no longer need to control the world when you are rooted in your own center. You no longer need everyone to like you when you have accepted yourself. This inner stability is what allows you to move through the world with strength and compassion. The world is full of people doing things for others that they don't even want to do for themselves. They give advice they don't follow. They offer love they don't give to themselves. They sacrifice until they're depleted and then grow bitter. But true giving comes from fullness, not emptiness. True service is not martyrdom. It is an extension of inner abundance. When you know yourself, you give from overflow. You serve from freedom, not compulsion. You no longer need to be needed in order to feel worthy. You give because it is aligned with who you are, not because you are trying to earn a place in someone else's life. That is the difference between conscious and unconscious living. And it begins with the courage to focus within. Jung believed that the more unconscious a person is, the more they are swept along by collective beliefs and emotional contagion. They become reactive rather than responsive. They become part of the herd, thinking as others think, wanting what others want, fearing what others fear. But individuation, the process of becoming a whole and conscious self, requires that you pull away from the crowd and ask, what is mine to do? What is mine to be? What is true for me? This requires silence, stillness, inner listening, and that is why it is so often misunderstood. We live in a world that values performance over presence, results over reflection, but the inner world cannot be rushed. It grows in stillness, it reveals itself in time. The act of inner focus also means becoming friends with solitude, not loneliness, but solitude, which is the space where the soul begins to speak. Most people fill every moment with noise, music, news, conversation, scrolling. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it starts to reveal things: restlessness, grief, longing, confusion. But that discomfort is the doorway to depth. If you can stay with it, if you can breathe into the silence and allow yourself to feel, then the deeper truths begin to rise. You start to remember what matters to you. You reconnect with your dreams, your values, your essence. You begin to feel less like a product of culture and more like a living, breathing mystery. It also means you will start to see the unconscious ways you've been running. Running from pain, from rejection, from failure, from your own inadequacy. And when you stop running, you start healing. That is not easy work. It is easier to keep busy, to blame others, to chase something new. But healing does not come from avoidance. It comes from turning toward the wound, sitting with it, listening to it, and understanding what it has to teach you. And that turning, slow, deliberate, sacred, is what makes the difference between a life that is reactive and one that is conscious. There is a deep irony in the idea that inner focus is selfish, because in truth, people who are unhealed hurt others the most. People who are fragmented cannot help but fragment their relationships. People who do not know who they are tend to become controlling, dependent, or resentful. On the other hand, those who know themselves deeply bring stability, compassion, and presence to those around them. They are not easily swayed by opinion. They do not need others to be different in order to feel okay. They are grounded in their own truth, and that makes them a steady presence in a chaotic world. So if anything, inner work is one of the greatest gifts you can offer to others. It is not selfish. It is service at the highest level. In a world of distraction, clarity is radical. In a world of conformity, authenticity is rebellious. And in a world that praises the external, inner work is revolutionary. But the truth is simple. You cannot live your fullest life without knowing who you are. And you cannot know who you are unless you are willing to stop, to listen, to feel, and to reflect. This takes time, it takes space, it takes courage, but it is the only way to move from survival to selfhood, from existence to meaning. It is tempting to believe that the world changes only through grand gestures, laws passed, leaders elected, institutions reformed. We are taught to look outside for change, to focus our energy on what can be seen, counted, measured. And while these external shifts matter, they are only the surface. Beneath every meaningful change in the world is a change in human consciousness. It is not systems alone that shape society. It is people, their values, their awareness, their level of inner development. And that is why the work you do within yourself, invisible as it may seem, has a ripple effect far beyond what you can immediately see. The truth is simple but radical. Your inner work changes the world around you. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that personal transformation was not just a private journey, but a moral obligation. When an individual becomes more whole, more conscious, more self-aware, they do not just liberate themselves. They influence their environment, their relationships, and even the collective psyche. This happens not through force, but through resonance. Just as one tuning fork can cause another to vibrate at the same frequency, a person who lives in alignment with their deeper self inevitably affects those around them. Their presence becomes a kind of mirror, a quiet challenge to others to awaken, to reflect, to grow. This is not always comfortable. In fact, it often disturbs the status quo. When one person in a family, friendship, or workplace begins to heal, to question old patterns, to set boundaries, the entire system is disrupted. Others may resist. They may accuse that person of changing, of being difficult, of pulling away. But the truth is that the system is simply adjusting to a new frequency. And this adjustment is necessary because the system was built around unconscious dynamics, roles, projections, unspoken agreements that were never examined. When one person breaks the spell, everyone is invited to wake up. Whether they accept the invitation or not is their choice, but the invitation itself is a powerful act of transformation. Inner work creates space for truth. When you begin to see yourself clearly, you can no longer tolerate the lies you used to live with, both within and outside yourself. You stop pretending. You stop enabling. You stop participating in dynamics that drain your soul. And this changes the world one relationship, one conversation, one moment at a time. You begin to show up differently, not as someone who needs to control, fix, or rescue, but as someone who embodies integrity. You speak more honestly. You listen more deeply. You love more freely, without attachment or expectation. And in doing so, you create a field of presence that affects others in ways you may never fully know. One of Jung's most powerful ideas was the notion of the collective unconscious, the shared layer of the psyche that contains the inherited memories, patterns, and archetypes of all humanity. This means that your personal journey is not just personal. It is connected to something larger. When you face your fear, you contribute to the healing of fear itself. When you integrate your shadow, you reduce the need for scapegoats in the world. When you step out of inherited trauma and begin to live consciously, you do not just free yourself. You shift something in the collective field. You become a node of clarity in a web of confusion, and that clarity ripples outward in ways that no metric can fully capture. Consider how many of the world's problems arise from unexamined inner wounds. Wars are often fought by men seeking power to cover their own insecurity. Relationships are destroyed by people projecting their unloved selves onto others. Injustice flourishes when individuals lack the empathy that only comes from knowing their own pain. And yet, when one person does the work to become more whole, to meet their fear with courage, their grief with compassion, their rage with understanding, that person becomes less likely to harm, to manipulate, to destroy. They become capable of choosing response over reaction, presence over projection, and that changes everything. Inner work also develops discernment. In a world flooded with noise, it is easy to be manipulated, to be swept along by collective emotions, by ideology, by propaganda. But the person who knows their inner landscape is less easily fooled. They have cultivated an inner compass. They can feel the difference between truth and illusion, between love and fear, between urgency and authenticity. This discernment allows them to navigate complexity with clarity, to stand firm in their values even when others waver. And when enough individuals live this way, society becomes less vulnerable to hysteria, less prone to division, less susceptible to tyranny. The effects of inner work are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are subtle. A calmer presence in a tense room, a compassionate response to someone's pain, a courageous stand in the face of injustice. These moments may seem small, but they matter. They are the building blocks of a more conscious world, and unlike external achievements, which fade with time, these inner shifts accumulate. They become part of your energy, your way of being, your legacy. Others feel it, even if they cannot name it. Children raised by parents who have done their inner work inherit emotional safety instead of trauma. Teams led by conscious leaders thrive on trust instead of fear. Communities shaped by awake individuals become places of healing instead of harm. Jung once wrote that the world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. He knew that the greatest danger to humanity was not outside us, but within us, our own unconsciousness, our own unwillingness to face the darkness within. That is why he placed such importance on self-knowledge, on integrating the shadow, on pursuing individuation. He believed that if enough individuals committed to this path, the world could change, not through revolution, but through evolution, not through domination, but through awakening. This is why your inner work matters. It is not self-indulgence. It is not retreat. It is revolution at the most fundamental level. When you choose to heal, you interrupt cycles that have been running for generations. When you choose to awaken, you break patterns that once seemed inevitable. When you choose to live from your center, you offer a different vision of what is possible, and that vision is not just an idea. It is a frequency, a felt experience that calls others home to themselves. The world does not need more perfect people. It needs more whole people. People who have faced themselves, who know their limits, who carry both humility and strength. People who can sit with discomfort without fleeing, who can hold contradiction without collapsing. People who no longer need to dominate or submit, but who can stand rooted in presence. This kind of person is not produced by chance. They are shaped by inner work, by the daily, unglamorous, often painful commitment to become more conscious, more loving, more real. So, when you sit in silence, when you journal through your confusion, when you cry old tears or confront buried anger, know that you are not just doing it for yourself. You are doing it for everyone you touch. When you choose to grow instead of numb, to listen instead of distract, to reflect instead of blame, you are creating ripples that go far beyond what you can see. This is how the world changes. And not all at once, not in headlines, but through the quiet, persistent work of individuals who have chosen to wake up.